This is the You, Me, and BTC podcast.
Cryptocurrency decrypted.
Welcome to episode 42. Last week, one of the most respected men in Bitcoin, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, spoke before a Canadian Senate Banking Committee. He did a fantastic job explaining Bitcoin, answering questions, and offering advice for how Bitcoin should or should not be regulated. Today, we'll be playing a few clips from the hearing and offering our own opinions. We might also have a few laughs at the expense of the lawmakers. Mr. Antonopoulos is one of Bitcoin's greatest speakers, so stay tuned. Your hosts are Tim Baker, John Stuart, and myself, Daniel Brown. Here we go. Hey everybody, welcome to the show today. This will be episode 42 of the You, Me, and BTC podcast. Thanks for joining us. I am Daniel Brown, and I'm here with Tim Baker.
Hello everybody.
And John Stuart.
Hey.
So, just a few days ago, the date here is October 8th, Andreas M. Antonopoulos went before a banking committee in Canada, a Senate committee, and gave some testimony just about what Bitcoin is and how it works and everything. And I watched the video. It's almost 2 hours, and I just thought it was really cool. Lots of good stuff from Antonopoulos, good information that people need to know, and also some, I don't know, kind of weird stupidity of the lawmakers and things like that. So, I don't know, I thought it was interesting. And basically I thought we would just play some clips and talk about it, talk about what he has to say and what he gets right. And there were a few times where I feel like he could have said a little more, or he could have said things a little differently and helped people understand it too. That definitely happened a few times, but he's amazing and it was interesting nonetheless. So I want to start with just his introduction. Well, not his introduction, but the introduction of him, because it's pretty cool. There's all kinds of cool stuff that they say that he did. Anything we should mention before we get started, guys?
I guess just in general, I didn't listen to the entire thing, but the little bit that I did listen to, and I noticed in the comments in the YouTube page, they seem to be pretty receptive to it, I guess. Like, there wasn't that kind of sleaziness. At least, I didn't see it as much. I mean, I don't know if they were or the banking officials that were there, it wasn't as negative, at least it didn't seem, towards Bitcoin as you tend to see from the United States.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you'd be a better judge than I would of that.
They were definitely respectful to him, and I guess we'll see as we play through. I mean, they were constantly thanking him and saying that you're kind of a cool guy and stuff like that. But I definitely also saw a couple of them were like, I don't understand this. This is dumb. Why are we even going to use this? And things like that. So I think it would definitely be a little bit of both. So we'll see if we find anything like that as we play through, I guess.
Yeah.
Should we start then?
Yep, that's fine.
All right. This will just be the introduction that was given for him. It was a lot better than the one we gave for him.
Today, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Andreas Antonopoulos, considered to be the Bitcoin guru. Suggested to us by several previous witnesses, Mr. Antonopoulos is both an entrepreneur and author in the field of Bitcoin. He is a computer sciences graduate from University College London. His expertise includes Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, information security, cryptography, cloud computing, data centers, Linux, open source, and robotic software development. He has had over 200 articles published in print and is syndicated worldwide. In addition, he is a certified information system security professional for over 12 years and is a permanent host on Let's Talk Bitcoin, a webcast devoted to Bitcoin. Mr. Antonopoulos is also a prolific public speaker, recently appearing at the Toronto Bitcoin Expo held earlier this year, which I must tell our committee, our analysts attended. He has literally, members of the committee, written the book on Bitcoin, which is entitled Mastering Bitcoin, Unlocking Digital Currencies. It is with great pleasure that I turn the floor over to Mr. Antonopoulos for his opening remarks, to be followed by your astute questions. Mr. Antonopoulos, welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
All right, so that was pretty awesome. I mean, what was that, a full, well over a minute and a half of just, I guess, kind of praise for Mr. Antonopoulos. So all kinds of cool stuff, a lot of good degrees and experience and things like that. So that's pretty crazy. I think for our introduction, all I said was, well, if you don't know who he is, I don't know why you're listening to our podcast. So, which is kind of legit.
Decent enough introduction, yeah. I mean,
right,
because you're going for different audiences too. This is for the kind of people who watch Canadian C-SPAN, so
yeah,
you're going to have to get really dry and long-winded for this, I'd imagine.
Right.
Well, think about it.
That's...
Like, our C-SPAN's bad enough, and then you have the Canadian one where it's going to be, oh, thank you, and sorry, and no, I'm sorry. I'm going to continue, Dan.
I don't endorse making fun of Canadians.
I think Canadians are pretty cool.
Well, you don't like all Canadians.
Says who?
I don't mind Canadians either.
You don't mind them, okay. Alright.
No one likes all of any type of person.
I allow them to exist. No, I haven't met a Canadian yet. Well, no, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I agree with your point. It's definitely different audiences. The people who listen to our podcast, maybe they don't know like what college he went to and stuff like that, but they know that he's a really well-known guy, a trusted guy, a respected guy in the Bitcoin community. So I think that generally makes a simpler introduction work for us, but it's also still interesting to hear all this crazy stuff from the Senate leaders too. So anyway, so I don't want to play this whole thing just because it's long and I want to have some commentary and everything on it too. So I don't want to play the whole thing, but I do just want to let it go for a little bit here just so we can hear his opening remarks, because it's kind of an important part, I guess, and a summary, I guess, of his plan and his goal of what he's trying to say and do and stuff like that. So I will just let it go here and play his opening remarks. Here we go.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to these proceedings about digital currency. My experience is primarily in information security and network architecture. I have a master's degree in networks and distributed systems and have worked in the field since 1992. I spent 20 years working on networks and data centers for financial services companies before I found Bitcoin in late 2011. I've been working full-time in the Bitcoin space for the past 2 years and written a book on Bitcoin for software developers. Today I welcome the opportunity to talk to you about Bitcoin security, the decentralized architecture that underpins Bitcoin security, and the implications that architecture has for privacy, individual empowerment, innovation, and regulation. Until the invention of Bitcoin in 2008, security and decentralization seemed like contrary concepts. Traditional models for financial payment networks and banking rely on centralized control in order to provide security. The architecture of a traditional financial network is built around a central authority, such as a clearinghouse. As a result, security and authority have to be vested in that central actor. The resulting security model looks like a series of concentric circles with very limited access to the center and increasing access as we move further away from the center. However, even the outermost circle cannot afford open access. In such a security model, the system is carefully protected by controlling access and ensuring that only vetted individuals and organizations can connect to it. The entities near the center of a traditional financial network are vested with enormous power, act with full authority, and therefore must be very carefully vetted, regulated, and subject to oversight. Centralized financial networks can never be fully open to innovation, because their security depends on access control. Incumbents in such networks effectively utilize access control to stifle innovation and competition, presenting it as consumer protection. Centralized financial networks are fragile and require multiple layers of oversight and regulation to ensure that the central actors do not abuse their authority and power for their own profit. Unfortunately, the centralized architecture of traditional financial systems concentrate power, creating cozy relationships between industry insiders and regulators, and often lead to regulatory capture, lax oversight, corruption, and in the end, financial crises. Bitcoin and other digital currencies based on the blockchain architecture are fundamentally different. The security model of blockchain currencies is decentralized. There is no center to the network, no central authority, no concentration of power, and no actor in whom complete trust must be vested. Instead, the core security functions are put in the hands of the end users of the system. In this architecture, security is an emergent property of the collaboration of thousands of participants in the network, and not the function of a single authority. In addition to the differences in architecture, there are also fundamental differences in the nature of the payments themselves. Digital currencies like Bitcoin are much more like cash than bank accounts or credit cards. The transfer of value in Bitcoin is a push mechanism, not a pull mechanism, as is the case with credit cards, debit cards, and most other digital payments. A Bitcoin payment is not an authorization to pull from your account. Instead, it pushes the precise payment amount itself as a value token directly to the named recipient. A single transaction does not authorize any future transaction or expose the user's identity. The transaction itself is unforgeable and unchangeable. As a result, Bitcoin payments can be transmitted in the clear without encryption over any network and can be stored on unsecured systems without fear of compromise. Bitcoin's unique architecture and payment mechanism has important implications for network access, innovation, privacy, individual empowerment, consumer protection, and regulation. If a bad actor has access to the Bitcoin network, they have no power over the network itself and do not compromise trust in the network. This means that the Bitcoin network can be open to any participant without vetting, without authentication or identification, and without prior authorization. Not only can the network be open to anyone, but it can also be open to any software application, again without prior vetting or authorization. The ability to innovate without permission at the edge of the Bitcoin network is the same fundamental force that has driven internet innovation for 20 years at a frenetic pace, creating enormous value for consumers, economic growth, opportunities, and jobs. Bitcoin's decentralized nature affords consumer protection in the most powerful and direct way by allowing Bitcoin users direct control over the privacy of their financial transactions. Bitcoin does not force users to surrender identity with every transaction and put their trust in a chain of supposedly vetted intermediaries who must be trusted to control access to, securely store, and protect transaction data and vulnerable account identifiers. Bitcoin transactions never expose vulnerable account identifiers, and Bitcoin users can protect the privacy of their transactions without relying on or trusting any intermediaries. Because in Bitcoin trust is not vested in central actors, there is no need for centralized regulation and oversight. When properly architected, Bitcoin financial services are not vulnerable to central point of failure, which would necessitate heavy-handed oversight and regulation. Instead, the power lies with the end user, whose interests are most aligned with the protection of their own funds. While individual Bitcoin wallets can be targeted and compromised, if not properly secured, the Bitcoin network does not suffer from centralized systemic risks. Contrary to popular misconception, Bitcoin is not unregulated. Rather, several aspects of the Bitcoin network and financial system are regulated by mathematical algorithm. The algorithmic regulation in Bitcoin offers users predictable, objective, measurable outcomes, such as a predictable rate of currency issuance. These outcomes are not subject to the whims of centralized institutions or committees, which are both corruptible and often placed outside of democratic oversight. A Bitcoin user can predict the monetary supply 30 years from now, instead of hanging on the nuanced intonation of a single adjective by some high official of central banking who can dramatically change an entire country's monetary velocity a week hence. Bitcoin's decentralized architecture does not easily conform to the expectations and experiences of consumers or regulators because there has never been a large-scale, secure, decentralized network before. The combination of decentralization and security is the novelty at the heart of Bitcoin. In trying to understand consumer protection, oversight, audit, and regulation of Bitcoin, there is a risk that many will try to apply familiar models of the past to this new digital currency system. These models are all centralized and designed to provide regulation and oversight of centralized financial networks. Centralized solutions will be easier to understand and seem familiar. However, they are both inefficient and unsuitable for this new form of decentralized financial network. I urge you to resist the temptation to apply centralized solutions to this decentralized network. Centralizing Bitcoin will weaken its security, dull its innovative potential, remove its most disruptive yet also most promising features, and disempower its users while empowering incumbents. Consumer protection will not be achieved by removing Bitcoin's built-in privacy characteristics. Demanding user identifiers and adding access control mechanisms on top of the Bitcoin network, and then trusting those identifiers to a chain of intermediaries, will only replicate the failures of the past by introducing single points of failure into a network that has none. We cannot protect consumers by removing their ability to control their own privacy and then asking them to entrust it in the same intermediaries who have failed them so many times before. Most failures in Bitcoin security are the result of misguided attempts at centralization and removing control from the users. In the new decentralized financial network, we have the opportunity to invent new decentralized security mechanisms. Based upon innovations such as multi-signature escrow, smart contracts, hardware wallets, decentralized audit, and algorithmic proof of reserves. These are the new decentralized regulatory and security tools that are most appropriate for a decentralized digital currency. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee.
All right, wow. That was a lot longer than I was expecting, but still worth listening to. I think definitely helpful to these people to some extent. And even, we tried to do a little bit of a beginner's episode a while back, and it wasn't terrible, but if you want the best you can do, this is probably it from Antonopoulos, just explaining why Bitcoin is good and stuff like that. I mean, obviously he doesn't explain everything, but I think this is really great content for beginners. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is exactly what I want to hear people hear whenever they ask me to explain it to them. I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this, and they should listen to something like this. Yeah, just
listen to that. Definitely. And I think his main focus there was clearly the idea of decentralization. That's what he talked about all the way through, was that Bitcoin has no central point of failure. It requires you to trust no one. It lets you control your own money. And then at the end, he says, I urge you not to try centralized solutions to make this stuff better because it's decentralized and that's the best way. So I think that was kind of his main point, with lots of interesting side points as well. But that is fascinating, and I definitely think that is one of, if not the the central part of Bitcoin is that it is not centralized. So
I think he did a good job of doing what we always say that everyone should be doing, and that's like explaining why Bitcoin. And I guess like the three main things I got from him was like, or from that intro or whatever you want to call it, the opening statements that he gave, was increased privacy, increased security, and freedom of innovation. Those were kind of like the three main like positive things that I think he really hit home.
Yeah. And the idea of increased innovation is actually, I think, another important thing that he was trying to say, because, well, not another, but one that I want to reiterate, because that's like part of the whole reason that he is there, is that he wants the innovation to happen. He knows there is so much opportunity there, And he has to go before these people and say, no, you can't do all this stuff, because if you regulate it in all the wrong ways or whatever, if you do anything wrong, you're going to stifle the innovation. And that's not what we want. That's not what's going to make our world better. And so, yeah, I definitely agree that he really is trying to tell people there is so much innovation that can happen, and we need to let it happen. We cannot hold that back. And I think that's an important point. Throughout the whole hearing, I think that's what he's really trying to say. So.
Yeah, it's good because he's not like, nothing in those three things is subversive to anybody. Like increased privacy, increased security, freedom of innovation. Nobody is against those things.
Right, definitely.
And I think that's exactly the kind of thing we need, like focusing on these very positive things that are so obviously things that everybody will agree with, instead of being like, well, obviously he's not going to go there and be like, Bitcoin is awesome because it lets us screw the government or anything like that. Like these are like really core principles that I would hope everyone can agree on.
Right, definitely. And you're right, it is interesting about him saying like, well, we don't want any government at all, because I think there were easily 3 or 4 times where people asked him, well, if you did tell us to regulate it, what would you say we should do? Or how would you say we should regulate it? And it's hard because I don't think he's a straight up full out anarchist or anything like that. So I don't think he was lying to them in his answers, but you could tell that he wanted to say that you shouldn't really be regulating it. But in the end, it kind of came out to be, well, give it a few years, let it develop, let it innovate if there's innovation that can happen, and then maybe come back after you give it some breathing room, and then revisit the idea. So he didn't straight up say no regulation, but you could tell he was kind of torn between like making these people happy and making them listen to him, and saying, no, don't do anything and just let it be. So anything else before we start looking through here? Cool. All right. Yeah, I found the beginning of a question, so we'll just listen to it and then talk about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antonopoulos, for being here. I'm finding very real interest in what you have to say. Let me outline, first of all, what I'm hoping to come to understand from you. I'm interested in coming to learn what is needed to ensure that this innovation can continue to develop. So that's my premise, right or wrong.
See, there we go. That's the kind of thing I was sort of talking about. He's like, well, we have to do something, right? We have to do something so that this innovation can happen, right? And
yeah, it's the thought that you need to help along any kind of new ideas or innovations because for whatever reason it can't do it itself, even though
right.
Normally that's not how it happens, because people, I mean, what looks to be in the short term the most advantageous is just to stick with the same old thing, because that's what we already have all the infrastructure behind. So, I mean, people want to say that they want to push for this stuff and they want to fund this, but if you're just looking as the short term, that's normally how people look. Just staying the same and not changing anything, it normally looks like the best option.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe not exactly related to what you're saying, but I've been like reading a lot of stuff about like innovative technology throughout the past, like kind of history of how we got to where we are now. And there's kind of a rule of thumb that like huge innovations are measured in like decades. Like it takes an average of like 20 years for a really disruptive innovation to actually take hold. Like, I mean, and things we've had have taken even longer. Like the internet, they had basically proto-internet back in the 60s, and it wasn't until like the late 90s where it started getting really huge. And then there's like 3D printing. That's been around since the 80s, but it's just now starting to kind of come out.
Right.
I guess just what I'm saying is like reaffirming what you're saying about how people kind of want to stick with what they have right now.
Yeah, and I guess I'm glad this guy says, well, That's just kind of my idea, and I could be right or wrong. But yeah, I agree with you that people find it hard to change their habits, and especially when you get to these old and gray kind of people. They're senators, and I know this is a stereotype, so it's not 100%, but yeah, a lot of them are old men, and they even say throughout some of the hearing, they're like, well, we're old people, and it's hard for us to understand all of this. So that is definitely true. And, well, I guess I'll just let him keep talking. Here goes.
But I do, building on the chairman's initial comments, have a question or two for you. When CA Vertex testified before this committee, they stated that they'd like to see Bitcoin regulations put in place as soon as possible to give clarity on how Bitcoin is classified.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad that I came to this question, because this is really the core of the question. Is there's somebody that said we need regulation. This is a previous witness. That it was called CA Vertex. I don't actually know what it is, but it must be some company or exchange in the Bitcoin space. And they said, we need regulation. And now Antonopoulos is saying, well, not really. And he's asking about it. I'll just let him keep going.
They believe, they told this committee, that this would allow Bitcoin to thrive in Canada. In your remarks, you've stated that Bitcoin should not be regulated centrally because it will stifle innovation. Considering that other groups have echoed the statements of CA Vertex, help me with the disconnect that I'm hearing between the evidence of CA Vertex and what you have said today.
Absolutely. I believe that the best way to help Bitcoin is to ensure that there is clarity in the treatment of Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin is not essentially forced into contorting itself into regulatory structures that are designed by banks for banks, or with traditional models of finance in mind, which are primarily centralized, and recognizing that Bitcoin as programmable money with capabilities such as digital multi-signature escrow has many more flexible ways of responding to the needs for consumer protection. For example, in the traditional banking environment, unless you hold cash, every account that you have as a consumer is a custodial account. That means that the account funds are held in trust by a bank, and what you have in return is essentially a promise note that that money will still be there tomorrow morning. The bank controls the funds entirely. Bitcoin allows a much more varied range of control between a consumer and a financial services institution that they may use, from completely decentralized control where the consumer or end user is the only one with full control over the money, to complete custodial accounts where a financial services institution has full access to the keys and the consumer has none. In between, there are also models that are hybrid, where the bank may have a signatory role but not be able to change the direction of the funds, simply to approve transactions. And so within this very broad range of possibilities, obviously some aspects of that do need to be regulated. What I mean by that is, if you simulate a traditional financial environment with a custodial account where you take full control of a user's funds, then those funds are now outside of the Bitcoin security model. They are no longer protected by the user's control of the keys. They're no longer protected by the blockchain. They are now in a gray area where they're not covered by regulatory requirements for capital adequacy audits, security requirements and controls, etc. But they're also not covered by Bitcoin's security model. And we've seen that whenever that has happened, it results in disaster. Almost all of the exchanges that have been attacked in Bitcoin had a full custodial model like that. However, that is not the only model that exists. There are digital Bitcoin wallets where the user has complete control. There are wallets where the user has complete control, but transactions cannot happen unless an additional signature is placed by an institution that acts essentially as a risk manager to ensure that even if the user's systems are compromised, the money can't be stolen, a hybrid model. If you lump all of those together, under a single unifying regulation, assuming it's all just like a bank, then you miss out on the opportunities to create better solutions with this new programmable money. So I do believe that certain models of Bitcoin use must be regulated. If control over the user's funds has been centralized, then that institution puts consumers at risk. But to lump a decentralized model where a user still has full control over their funds and an institution can't steal their money under that same regulation is not only misguided, but doesn't leave any room for that technology to develop further.
All right. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I don't necessarily agree with him that really anything should be regulated at all, but he does make a really important distinction between the different kinds of Bitcoin services. Some of them, like say Mt. Gox, they actually hold your money. They keep it for you and you're just trusting them. And he is saying that, sure, maybe that should be regulated because that's the way banks have worked traditionally. And yeah, that is a pretty substantial risk to a consumer, is if somebody is literally holding all of their money. So yeah, maybe that should be regulated, but he distinguishes that from any other kind of Bitcoin service where they don't hold your money. Either it works through multi-signature or they don't hold any keys at all, which is true with a number of Bitcoin wallet services and things like that. If they don't have control over your money, they should absolutely not be regulated. That doesn't help anybody. Nobody even needs that kind of help because they have their own money and they're in control of their own money. Why do I need anyone else to help me protect my money if I already have it and I'm in control of it? So I think that's an important distinction. I don't agree with everything that he said, but I think that's a really good point to make. You're listening to the YMB and BTC podcast. We need your help. First of all, we'd love it if you could check out our website, YMBandBTC.com. There you can find donation addresses for every single article and episode, and we'd love it if you could make use of those. We could also use some fans and followers, so if you're willing, please visit Facebook or Twitter.com/YMBandBTC. Lastly, remember to subscribe to the show. You can do that on iTunes or sign up on our website to receive email updates. Thanks for your support. There is all kinds of good stuff in this talk, and honestly, I kind of wish we could just listen to the whole thing and talk about the whole thing. But there are at least two other things that I definitely want to get to. So I want to move on now to one, I don't know, I thought it was kind of a crazy question. I tweeted about it a couple of days ago. This is a lady on a banking committee, a government, Senate, whatever, banking committee. And I'll play it right now. She asks how one currency is valued in relation to another currency, which I know if you just ask someone on the street, they might not have a quick answer to that question. Although if they thought about it, they probably would know the answer. But a banking committee member doesn't know how one currency is valued in relation to another. She doesn't know that it's just an exchange. It's just whatever people are willing to trade them for. I think it's kind of crazy. She asks her question in French, so we'll hear it through a translator, I guess. I'll just play it.
A very short question on a matter that was raised previously. If Senator Ringgit were to issue a Ringgit coin this week, and if our chair had his Bitcoin for a number of months already, I'd like to know what the value of one in relation to the other would be.
So the various currencies that exist out there are related to each other based on a free-floating market rate. And that market rate is determined by trade between individuals on exchanges where those currencies can be sold and bought for each other. This is exactly the same mechanism with which the exchange rate between the Canadian dollar and the US dollar is determined, or between any currency in the modern world. So all of these currencies have a free-floating market value. I would argue that with that, if there is very low liquidity in that market, it will be very difficult to establish a price that is representative of the value of that currency, and price discovery will be difficult and in fact will lead to very, very large volatility. As Bitcoin and other currencies get larger, the volatility decreases. In fact, the volatility of Bitcoin today is not at all dissimilar from the volatility of oil during the first decade of the discovery that oil could be used as a substitute fuel instead of, say, whale oil that was used at the time. We see this with new technologies where as the market develops, it starts off with tremendous volatility. But over time, as the amount of volume and liquidity in the markets increases, the volatility is reduced until these currencies become extremely stable. For a global currency, a $5 billion valuation is tiny. And so I would expect that Bitcoin will remain volatile for many years to come.
All right, so there it is. I mean, in her defense, Bitcoin is hard to understand, and maybe she doesn't know that it can work the same way. And also in her defense, like Antonopoulos said, if there's a really early coin without much liquidity, sure, it can be hard to determine an exchange rate. So I don't want to completely bash her to pieces, but I thought that was kind of a dumb question to ask.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I'd agree with what you said, but I guess maybe another thing in her defense is that she might have been expecting him to give the answer that he gave, and she was asking just in case there was some kind of other thing that she didn't know about.
That's true. And like I said, she doesn't know a ton about Bitcoin, so she might not know if it can work the same way. So she's asking, does it work the same way, or is there something we don't know about? So that's true.
Yeah.
Quit being so hard on the Canadian lady, Daniel.
Tim, what do you mean me? You were the one going after him earlier.
No, I said something about not wanting to watch Canadian C-SPAN. I don't want to watch United States C-SPAN either, but Canadian C-SPAN, it doesn't have the sleazy politicians in it as much, and the anger and the... Anyway.
I think your comment was more against Canadians in general than just Canadian C-SPAN.
I don't know.
Somebody actually said shit somewhere in here, which I guess they have more lax laws in Canada, because I didn't think you could broadcast that in America, so...
I don't know, it might be different on C-SPAN.
Well, that's true too. I mean, if a senator says it, it's probably okay for them to do it, so... Yeah,
I don't know. That's probably like the equivalent of like watching NASCAR to see the crashes. Like, to watch C-SPAN for somebody to swear.
Yeah.
We should probably cut that.
Wait, why do I have to cut that?
I mean, I don't. You can play it. I don't know why John's saying not to cut that. I'd say cut quite a few of the things we've said.
You know what I'll do? I won't leave it in there. I'll just cut right to where John says, "Oh, you should cut that," and everybody's gonna wonder what we just cut out. And I don't know. You guys will have to figure it out.
You should make some like scratchy noise or something so they can tell that something was cut.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll move on, I guess. Like I said, I really wish we could get to, I don't know, pretty much all of this. It would be great to listen to it bit by bit and talk about it. And I might leave open the possibility of even coming back to this next week and finding some other bits to talk about, because it is, it's 2 hours long and there is a ton of good stuff in here. So we'll think about that. But anyway, one more thing that I really want to find is, well, I'll find it. It was pretty darn close to the end.
Let me talk to you about, you basically answered the question, but the way I see it, this is a highly secure form of transfer, anonymous form of transfer of property. You can call it currency, but you're using it now for a currency from a sense of bartering. But I presume, talk to me about it seems to me this could be very, very useful in many things, including exchange of property. Today we have a bunch of lawyers or notaries who acknowledge the safe transfer of real estate property. But it seems to me this application could be used very, very often in many, many different facets. So let's 5 years forward. How do you see this technology being used to the benefit of our society? Give me some examples.
All right, yeah, this is actually a really good one. And he gives all kinds of examples, which I'll just play and we'll see what he talks about. He mentions the blockchain wedding, which we talked about last week, and somebody asks, like, well, why did they get married on the blockchain? And he has to explain it. But he does mention all kinds of cool things that could be done with the idea of blockchain technology. And one of which I think is just mind-blowing, honestly, but I'll let him get there and then we'll talk about it.
There are some very interesting applications where the decentralized ledger is used as a public record of sorts for all kinds of things, from registering bicycles to registering automobiles to registering company shares. 2 days ago, I was at a Bitcoin conference where a couple was married, and their marriage was registered on the blockchain for the first time. They use the blockchain as a registrar of that contract. You could use it to register titles and deeds for property and transfer those titles and deeds for any form of property, including vehicles, real estate. With a simple electronic transaction, you could transfer the deed to a car. Even better, and more importantly, the car could look up its own title and render itself usable to the new owner automatically. And this concept is called smart property, where the property recognizes its ownership through reference to the blockchain. All forms of decentralized registration can be implemented with the blockchain. Furthermore, you can issue share certificates or any other form of token that can be traded, from sharing my bandwidth and receiving a token in return that I can spend to use somebody else's bandwidth, creating the possibilities for sharing economy similar to how we do Airbnb or sharing cars today. We can do many of those things using digital tokens. There's a company here in Toronto who developed an application that allows you, upon submitting a transaction on the blockchain, to unlock a door. For example, for an Airbnb apartment.
That's what I was
So your
talking
smartphone
about.
would make the payment and then also unlock the door to the apartment and have access to that property.
Yeah, I thought that was just insane. I knew it was, possible. And the fact is, they've already done it. And that's just amazing, I think. So many possibilities with property that responds to you. Like he was talking about the car that would only turn on for its owner, and unlocking a door with a Bitcoin transaction. I think that's mind-blowing. What do you guys think?
That's been mentioned before, I'm pretty sure, by Andreas. Like, that they had done that. It was with a small door, and I'm pretty sure we talked about it on here.
Yeah, you know what? I actually do vaguely remember looking at a picture of it before, and yeah, it probably was for the podcast. So you're right. We probably have talked about it before, and it probably blew my mind then, but...
Well, I wasn't there for that, so... but I would believe it. And it's pretty cool to hear it now.
Yeah, and maybe I didn't recognize just how amazing it would be last time we talked about it, because right now it I think that's insane in a good way. So, real quick, I want to see if I can find just kind of an interesting joke that somebody made. It'll just be a few seconds.
Minor questions, a secondary question. I don't understand why the blockchain for a couple getting married. Why? Is he scared to get mixed up with the wife? Or what's the issue? Why the need for that issue?
So, it was largely symbolic and a proof of concept. This couple was already married under traditional state laws. However, what they wanted to do was they wanted to record their marriage on a record that was publicly accessible, unforgeable, and completely unchangeable through time. It provides a permanent record of what has happened, an unalterable history that within an hour is completely unalterable by anyone, and will be preserved through history because of the value of the transactions that occur.
So the bedroom door does not open if it's the wrong person, is that Automatic access.
That was actually exactly what I was looking for. The idea that you could make a bedroom door that only unlocks for your real wife or stuff like that. I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, so that's a good explanation of why the blockchain too, or why the blockchain wedding. Well, because it's permanent, unalterable. It's really, really meaningful. So, and it is also symbolic in a way, so. Thanks for listening to episode 42. All of the music in today's show was from John Stuart. We'll see you next Thursday.